everyone. So we're still talking about the Northern Renaissance or the Northern Early Renaissance. And what I'm showing you here is a painting by Roger van der Weyden. And it's called The Deposition. The Deposition is always meaning the scene when they're taking Jesus off of the cross after he's been crucified. So the first thing maybe you notice, at least I notice when I'm looking at this painting, is there are a lot of people here. There's not a lot of space. They're kind of closely put together, and if you look carefully, there's really no background. So it almost looks as though they're on a stage. And then we have these really kind of strange architectural elements here, and you see this line in the background. So are they on a stage? Where are they? It's up to your interpretation. The other thing I notice is with the people, their clothing is very elaborately detailed. So this being probably the most detailed example, right? But we have this beautiful kind of drapery, and I explained already that in the Northern Renaissance, they're going to focus in a lot on detail. We have Mary here. Mary is always dressed in blue because blue was the most expensive color, so it's a way of honoring her. So she has fainted from the sight of her dead son being removed from the cross. And it's a very sad scene. We see, this woman weeping in the background, and this woman, praying and very sad. And then the one thing you also might notice is the whole shape of the canvas here as it goes up into this extension of this piece here. It's a little on the unusual side, right? We don't usually see something like this, but then it kind of mirrors or mimics the shape of the cross by doing that. The other thing I want to draw your attention to is the skull here, and maybe like the femur or something here, another bone here. And people at this time period who were viewing this would recognize right away that this is making a reference to Adam. So the biblical Adam, like of Adam and Eve. So it's believed that Adam was actually buried on the site where Jesus ends up being crucified. So that's the reference that is being made here. And as I said, the people at the time period would have known that story and would have recognized that reference. So what happens then is we have these older painters that I've just shown you really set up the style in the North, and we have then another generation of painters that comes along known as the second generation painters. We have Petrus Christus, and this is his painting, A Goldsmith in a Shop. And this is our first painting where we really have like a believable setting in a shop, a commerce, kind of district. And when we're looking at this is something that people would have at this time been a goldsmith. So he has this young couple who has come to visit him in his shop, and they're very wealthy. They're dressed in extremely high fashion for the day. It looks a little silly to us at this time period, but this was very high fashion then. And we can make the assumption that they've probably come to have gold weighed for wedding rings. So they're going to be married. And again, note all of the detail here is quite amazing. The table is still a little weird with the perspective that it looks like it flips up a little bit. These things look like they would slide off, as well as the shelf over here. It doesn't really look like things are sitting correctly on the shelf. We have this beautiful kind of reflection, though that's made tons of detail. And then we have this interesting piece down here. And we can make the assumption that this scene is taking place in front of a window. And so the piece here is actually reflecting the scene that is out on the street, looking in on this young couple getting the gold for their wedding rings. And this kind of reflection, we saw it in the last one in the Jan Vette Eck piece, where we have behind them the reflection of the two figures. So reflection like this becomes this kind of play in the Northern Renaissance that they really like to incorporate into the paintings. This brings us to tapestries. And tapestries are woven fabric, and certainly they actually had tapestries before, but at this time period in the North, they take on kind of this new meaning and this decorative element that hadn't been seen before. So we actually have here in New York City, again at the Cloisters in the upper part of Manhattan, this tapestry and a number of really beautiful tapestries. And this is the story of the unicorn. So we have a couple of these different tapestries at the Cloisters, and they're the hunt for the unicorn, where they have this mythological beast, the unicorn, or mythological creature, not really a beast, creature that they're hunting. And it makes reference to Jesus and to the resurrection. So when we look at this, the really interesting things are that all of the plants here and all of the animals are actually depicting plants and animals that would be found in Northern Europe, in the area where this tapestry was created, except for the unicorn, of course, because that really is a made-up creature, right? And then the way the people are dressed, the huntsmen, they are looking as though they are stepping out of this time period in the late, we're into the late 1400s, early 1500s now. That brings us to graphic design, graphic arts. And I have a couple of videos up about this to show you these if you've never heard of these techniques, to kind of give you more of a visual. But remember, up until this time period, we have in Europe illuminated manuscripts. They are handwritten books made on either vellum or parchment. They are so labor intensive and extremely costly. And then we have this technique of printing that gets invented or discovered here in Europe. This technique of printmaking had been known in China for a long, long time, but it gets discovered here in Europe. So we have two kinds of printing: intaglio printing and relief printing. Relief printing is really like a rubber stamp. You can think of it that way. So you're going to carve away the background so you have a raised piece of whatever you're carving, and then you put ink on that raised piece. You put a piece of paper on it, you rub the back, or you send it through a press, and you pull it off, and you have the image from the raised piece, just like a rubber stamp, okay? Although the image will be in reverse. These images are always going to, a rubber stamp as well, comes up in reverse. An intaglio print is a little bit more complicated. You have a plate, this is called a plate, and it's metal usually. Sometimes though you can use plastic or other material like that. I think the one in the video actually uses plastic. And you are either scratching into it, or you are eating into it with acid, or there are a couple of ways, but in essence you're making lines or grooves in it, and then you're covering it with ink. You're taking a special material called tarlatan, and you're rubbing off the ink so that this part here no longer has ink, but you leave the ink in the grooves that you've made. Then you take wet paper that's damp, and you put it on top of it, and you run it through a press. And the press presses the paper into the grooves, and when you pull the paper off, you're pulling the ink out of the grooves. Okay. So again, I have two videos up that show you this. So here's an example of a woodcut. So it's like a rubber stamp again. So they made a picture, and then they printed it, and then they hand colored in all the color. So it's still really labor intensive, but in comparison to an illuminated manuscript, this was speedy. And this is on paper. So we have paper now that we're printing on. And so you can do a woodcut, and depending on the quality of the woodcut and the kind of wood you use and everything, you can make hundreds of prints from them. So it really was much faster than anything that had been printed before. And we have then, as these become faster and more economical to make, we have now more books that are being made, and we have then the availability of Bookstart. More people learn how to read, more people learn how to write, and things really begin to change because people learn more. Here's an engraving, so that intaglio technique where you're taking a piece of metal and you're etching into it, and then you're putting the ink on it and the paper and pulling the paper off. And this is really a beautiful example here of the temptation of St. Anthony, where St. Anthony is trying to really focus on the Bible and the studies and everything. And these demons are coming and they're bothering him and they're trying to tempt him, but he's so focused. He doesn't get disturbed by anything. But as far as aesthetically, we can say that we have these like really dark blacks, and then we have these very subtle shades of gray in here, and this is all one print, and it just has to do with how much ink is put in the groove, depending on how deep the groove is. So the deeper the groove, the more ink it holds, the darker the line it makes. And so it's a complicated process, but it's really beautiful in the end results that you can get from it. And another example here of another engraving, and this one almost looks like the background is a tapestry, and we have the Battle of the Nudes here, and we see the muscular bodies here that are battling one another in this kind of very horrific scene. This guy's got an axe. He's going to hit this guy in the back with an axe. That's just gruesome. But we have all of these subtle gradations here that are really amazingly done. And that brings us into the 15th century in Italy. So I'm going to stop here and make another video for that one.